I typically go to bed later than my wife.
I go much, much earlier.
So I fall asleep later.
Okay.
I'm in bed. I'm not asleep yet. And I'm like just about to fall asleep. Like I'm just tipping into sleep. And I hear this bang.
Oh.
And I'm like, what the hell was that? Literally so much so that I knew it was in the house. But you know how like when you're asleep, you don't hear the first part of the bang. You hear the last part of the bang. And I'm pretty sure it's in the house. I go look. I can't find anything. I can't, did like something fall over? Did something fall off a shelf? Went to the kids' rooms, walked all over the house in the dark. Can't find anything. Okay, I'll go back to sleep. Go back in bed. Not 2 minutes later, I hear this like, what the hell is that? I get out of bed and I'm looking around. It's dark. Again, I haven't turned the lights on. I don't want to wake anybody else up.
You have a dying burglar.
It sounded like a raccoon was dying in my room. Like that's really what it sounded like. But this was definitely in the room. There was no doubt in my mind this was in the room because I'm now awake.
Yeah.
And I look around and underneath the bench at the base of our bed, my children had stashed all of their Minecraft weapons that were made out of balloons that they got at a birthday party. And one of them had popped and was now leaking the rest of the air out. And that's what I fucking heard. I had no idea they were there. I was so annoyed. Like my children put balloons in my room that ended up popping. Oh, I was so pissed. I scooped them all up. It's the 11 o'clock at night.
Sure.
Walked them into the living room, dropped them off so I didn't have to pop them all. Came back to bed, and my wife's just laughing at me.
That's hilarious.
Because these balloon toys. Yeah.
Quiet, please.
Fucking netherite sword.
In
and
4,
diamond axe.
3,
It's all made out of balloons.
2.
It was terrible.
The Alpha Company presents a truly terrible podcast. Welcome to Nonsense Season 2, Episode 38. I'm Jeff Parker.
I'm Still.
This is our take on the week's business, tech, and entertainment headlines. This time, we'll look at the advancing technology of artificial light.
That's the stuff that's made out of silicone?
It's National Doorbell Day, celebrated on October 31st annually because, when else, to recognize the buzzer bell, chimer, melody, tunes, and so on, beckoning us whenever there is a guest at the door. When kids come to trick or treat on Halloween, it's the doorbell that announces their arrival. Get ready to welcome Halloween with the humble doorbell.
Isn't this where you plug some fucking doorbell that's Matter over Threads or some other shit?
Open source. It's an open source.
It's an open source doorbell. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want one of those closed source doorbells with the wires in it. Yeah. No.
How's your week going?
My week has been lovely. I had my parent teacher conference with my son, which is great.
Love it.
They said nothing but nice things about him.
How lovely.
A good kid and a lot of energy and yada yada yada. And I was like, okay, I'm buying this. He puts on a good show there.
Yeah.
And then they said, and he just loves his brother and talks about him all the time. And I said, I'm sorry, I think you've got the wrong kid. Can you check your notes again? Because that is not the version of him that I know. But
double check Max Little.
Sure, let's believe. No, it was really great, and they had nothing but nice things to say, and that he's a fun kid. And the only comment that could be perceived as even mildly negative or something to work on is his PE teacher said, sometimes he needs a little guidance to stay on track. He's distracted by other kids, and I was like, yeah. He's. Have you listened to the show?
That's my kid.
Fucking squirrels with aluminum foil balls. But no, it was great. I'm excited. This week has been lovely. We've got Halloween today, which is going to be awesome, and we're very excited. How about you?
That's the problem with this show today. All you want to talk about is your kids, and all I want to talk about is the Dodgers winning.
Same thing. My kids are very good at stealing things out of other kids' gloves.
Oh, gosh. Speaking of National Doorbell Day, I've been slowly working on my own doorbell installation.
Yeah.
I have a doorbell that is probably 30 years old, and so it's time for a little updating. And it's complicated because the doorbell, in this case, doesn't go directly on the house.
Yeah.
It goes on a gate in front of the yard, so now there's a conduit that's required and Cat 5 cable, and the whole thing gets I'm going to put in a video doorbell. Like, I want to be the Jetsons.
I get it. I understand.
Let's get to our headlines.
Let's do it.
Ban on Chinese tech is so broad, U.S.-made cars will be blocked, Polestar says. Today, Polestar electric vehicles gained access to the Tesla supercharger network. That means Polestar drivers have access to 18,000 more DC fast chargers than they did yesterday.
Yeah.
Once they get a NOx adapter, which can be ordered today from the local Polestar service point. But right now, Polestar has bigger worries than expanding its charging options. Should propose new rules banning Chinese connected car software and hardware go into effect, it would effectively ban the automaker from the U.S. auto market, the company says, including the EV it builds in South Carolina.
Yeah, so this is a little disingenuous. This comes from Ars Technica. And they go on to talk about how Polestar is a U.S. organized company. It's a subsidiary of a U.K. public company that's listed on the NASDAQ, and then its headquarters is in Sweden, and that 7 out of 10 board members are from Europe or the U.S.
Was part of Volvo for a long time.
Well, Volvo was one of the early investors in Polestar.
And then they sold out.
Yeah, so they divested their stake, and Geely owns most of this thing, which is a Chinese company.
Yeah.
And I feel like all of this other hand waving over like, oh, we got board members in Sweden and in the US. It's like, yeah, and they're all replaceable. So like, I get that the current control stack has some modicum of not being in China, but it's still a Chinese held business. I don't know how you dance around that fact.
They're making cars in South Carolina.
Yep.
They have something like 2,800 employees and only 280 are based in China.
Yeah, I get that, but you're still the mothership.
I don't know how that rule is going to work at all. You're going to affect a lot of cars because an awful lot of cars have parts that are made in China, shockingly enough.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure there is a car that doesn't have a part made in China.
You have vehicles made by like Lincoln and Buick that are actually made in China,
Yeah.
which is still a U.S. held.
It's important to you that the shareholders are U.S. people. In that case, the cars can be made in China?
Yeah. What's kind of interesting about that too is you go, well, I'm assuming the argument would be, well, the components are Chinese. It's like, well, yeah, hold on now. You got a lot of cars that have Chinese components in them still anyway.
I can't imagine there's a single car on the road that isn't full of Chinese-made components.
You mean a new car? My 1988 BMW
Right.
E30, I promise, has no Chinese components in it.
And there's a handful of those still running.
That's a really good question. I bet you are wrong. I'm thinking of a modern BMW. How many components in a modern are made in China? That number very well might be zero. They have to list it, don't they? When you bring the car in?
I don't know.
Let's find out. I mean, I know BMW does make cars in China. Of course, not talking about those. In the past,
Yeah.
they being
BMW.
the big German BMW, Volkswagen, Jaguar, Land Rover, have bought parts made by a Chinese company that's been sanctioned for using forced labor.
That's how they made the parts so cheap.
Well, I mean, it's all that stuff, right? For sure. Yeah, okay. I think I'm wrong on this. At some level, I guess there's some componentry that's coming from China. I don't know. Does that include Taiwan? Are you including TSMC in that?
I don't think anybody's thinking Taiwan is the same as China. You say made in Taiwan or you say made in China.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. I suspect there are some componentry. There might be let's say an ECU that has a Chinese-made chip in it, maybe. I don't know.
I don't even know necessarily about the chips.
You're saying actual components.
Assembly or components put together.
Yeah, so that's gonna be tricky. Are they banning dumplings or not? That's all I really care about. Can I still get the dumplings? I don't ask a lot.
We're also upset the Chinese government has been heavily subsidizing for years the auto industry exports
So that's the protectionism.
as a way to undermine foreign competition in areas like green tech.
And it's not great, right? If you've got the Chinese eroding existing manufacturing markets by heavily subsidizing this, it's a great trick. I mean, we've certainly done it ourselves in the past.
We do it currently.
Yeah.
Listen, here's the great dirty secret about the U.S. Don't spread this around. Don't tell anyone.
Don't tell
this.
anybody. Oh, good. Fortunately, no one's listening right now after the beginning doorbell segment. So please go ahead.
We subsidize everything.
No, that corn is all grown at market rates.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
This is how we do it.
I know.
When you subsidize corn, as we do, you bring the food price so far down that you can lower the wage of workers so much that you literally affect every single product made in the country.
How do you get off the teat? How do you get off the teat of that once you start?
I don't think you can at this point. Farmers have such a strong lobby.
Well, you can. You have to rip the Band-Aid off, and a lot of hair comes with it. You just have to rip the fucking Band-Aid off.
That's an ugly, ugly image.
Yeah, it is. Otherwise, you're on this gravy train forever.
I'm on a gravy train with a Band-Aid with hair.
Oh, you literally meant that's an ugly image. I thought you were speaking more metaphorically. It's the Italian genes in me. Yeah, it's a lot of hair. It's
And now the
everywhere.
gravy train.
I have a built-in sweater. You have a lot of car companies that started out recently in the past, let's say 15 years, as EV-only car companies. And I do suspect that in the next decade or so, a lot of them are going to have their lunches eaten. If they don't identify, if they don't have a real identity that people can align with, a lot of the big guys are going to come move into those spaces.
You think like companies like Fisker are going to go out of business?
Yeah, weird, huh? For the second time? I think nobody bothered to look up the fact that in like Dutch, Fisker means bankrupt. Somebody should have probably fact-checked that at some point. That's what it means. It loosely translates to Chapter 11.
I think there's still going to be a huge market for inexpensive EVs.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And made in China is how you make them super cheaply because they abuse labor terribly.
No, here's what we're going to do.
What?
We are going to be the country of abusing robots. And we're going to get a bunch of little AI robots to make little AI cars.
Oh, did you see Boston
Yeah.
Robotics
No.
presentation 2 days ago?
No.
They have new robots, and they're the Optimus robots, only they really are not human assisted. They're really the real thing.
Please tell me they played that up in the presentation where they're like,
No.
these ones aren't controlled by humans.
They're too classy.
They are too classy. I'm glad they don't sink to his level. So are they bipeds? Are they tripeds? Are
They're
they
bipeds.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
had bipeds for years, but they're amazing. They're almost everything the Optimus should have been, except for the Optimus was fake. This is real.
I'm an early adopter on some shitty technology, like, my Apple Vision Pro here holding out a stack of paper. I didn't buy a Segway. Remember when Segway was going to transform the whole world?
Oh, sure.
However, if Boston Dynamics came out with a home robot and they said, look, early adopters, heavy price tag, and it was like a monopod, I'd buy that that thing in a fucking heartbeat. If you had like a little pogo stick bouncing around your house cleaning up,
Sure.
I'd be all over, because not only would it like clean my toilets, it would make me laugh constantly.
Of course.
It's just like bounce, like
boing, boing,
basically,
boing,
I want it to
boing.
look like the light on Pixar. Like, remember the little light that comes out and
Right.
bounces
Sure,
on
sure.
the eye? I want that. Give me that, and I will give you my money.
25% of Google's new code is all coming from AI.
Wow, that's, I guess, impressive.
I mean, that means they've got some systems that they haven't exposed to the rest of us, because you wouldn't use any of that
The
code.
irony is
mostly.
it's coming from Azure. They're using Azure's AI to code it.
Copilot. It's all Copilot code.
Copilot. Ding, ding, ding. I see you're trying to search the web. Ding, ding, ding. And meanwhile, Satya's like, I think that's ours. No.
Russian court wants Google to cough up 2 undecillion rubles.
What is an undecillion ruble?
A 2 followed by 36 zero rubles, 20 decillion US dollars, which is a 2 followed by 34 zeros. Because Google has stopped carrying Russian propaganda TV on YouTube. And so the Russians are upset, and they created this enormous number, way more than Google is even worth.
Yeah.
So Google couldn't pay it if they wanted to. And now they're saying they're going to double that amount every week. You're already starting with a cartoon large number.
And they're doubling it every week, which, by the way, I got to believe you've got a really pissed off Warren Buffett right now going, why didn't I think of that? That is, talk about compounding interest.
How come I can't get in on this?
How come I can't get me some compounding doubling? A 2 followed by 34 zeros sounds like what it looks like at closing time at a bar in like Richmond, California. There's 1 2 left, and she's being followed by 34 zeros trying to get their way.
Okay, now with the headlines. Up next, we're going to talk about the advance of artificial light.
So now we're shilling for big filament. Is that
Somebody has to keep the lights on in this place.
By the way, a lot of people don't know this. The way I put myself through college was doing some porn, and that was my porn name, Big Filament. Isn't it your segment today?
Oh, believe me, I'll do it if you want.
Oh, boy.
You're the guy today.
I like you just riffing one. We're talking about birthmarks.
Count me in.
What? What are you talking about? There's like a whole bunch of people over the course of time, right? Great thinkers, innovators, philosophers that like to say things. I usually attribute it to Newton. Basically like saying they're standing on the shoulders of giants.
We all are.
Yeah, everyone is, of course.
Yeah.
And that's progress, right? You have things that come before you, and it helps you sort of achieve the next thing, whatever that is.
We're all standing on the shoulder of single cell organisms.
We are. Which is odd, because you wouldn't think they would have shoulders, but apparently the cell is just a shoulder. But when you have, especially technology, right? It's all like these layers upon themselves. We've constantly improved things, made things better. Yeah, just stack things up.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about AI in this show and modern software. We talk a little bit about some technology history, right? We talk about how AI is going to be the next big thing, we think.
Sure.
And how like before that, you had the internet, and you had a world before the internet, and then after the internet, and sort of what that looked like.
I like to, just so that every show is not about AI, occasionally I'll throw in something about high-speed rail.
Or hurricanes. Yeah.
Or not eating meat, and really get our viewers pissed off.
Sure. Much like a collection of misdemeanors. I'm just trying to get those expunged from the show. But hey, here we are. But I was thinking, and I was like, okay, you have some obvious preceding technologies, right? Like computing at large or personal computing. Those things have led us down this path to AI. And I kind of had this idea to talk about electricity and sort of the advent of electricity, which is really not that old. It's our ability to harness electricity. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, but wait a minute. You've got something even bigger before that. And as anybody who's listened to this show, I think for more than 2 episodes knows, one of my favorite quotes from Arthur C. Clarke is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Sure.
And I've always loved that, because I do think any sort of new, quote, advanced technology, you look at that and you go, that is magic. I don't know how it works.
So you want to talk about some pre-electric technology, something pre-electricity.
So I was thinking, like, because electricity had to be magic to observers, right? The folks that were there were like, I don't know how that's working. I don't know how you're putting the devil in the wires, but it's completely magic.
It was a key on a kite string.
Yes, the man who liked to take naked baths. He is one of them. We should do a whole episode on Ben Franklin. Because
Thought it would be fun to play with lightning.
Exactly. Ben was an interesting guy. I do feel like if we were to go back and do like the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure thing again, I'd definitely bring back Franklin. I'd love to bring back Newton.
Oh, yeah.
Just bring him back and just show him here's an AI, and just watch the dude's head explode.
Here's where we went with that,
totally.
by the way.
You bring him back, and he's just like, oh, that's really cool, but like, there's no 5G here? Why? It doesn't work at your house? He's still like complaining about, he's like, you only have 600 megabit down? Oh, that's kind of terrible.
I thought you'd be much farther forward by now.
God damn it, Isaac. So I was thinking, okay, electricity, but then it dawned on me, you got something that's even, I'd argue, more impressive as recent, quote unquote, technology relative to our civilization.
Yeah.
And that is light.
Oh, yeah.
Like actual artificial light.
Okay.
Go back a couple thousand years, you had the sun, and that was it. That was it. You're laughing, but like you had the sun and then like maybe you had fire.
A couple thousand years.
Yeah, there was nothing else.
Maybe a few thousand years.
Yeah, okay, a few. Sorry. Okay. Oh, Jesus, pedantic. Episode 38. Yeah, look, round numbers. 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, there you go.
You had some fire, right? You probably had some ability to create fire, but that was it. If it was raining out, you were fucked.
Put out your fire.
There was no good option for this. I started thinking about light, and then I was looking around online and seeing what sort of options we have. And it amazes me how quickly that even I, as a self-proclaimed technologist, forget about these astonishingly impressive facts around something like light.
Yeah, artificial light changed the world.
It's kind of crazy. So I started digging around, and I came across this article in Big Think by Tony Morley. And he was talking about advances in artificial light. And the way he compared it, or at least gave you some perspective, I thought was really fascinating. I thought you would enjoy it, and maybe some of our listeners. He opens with, quote, "For nearly all of human history, fire was our only source of artificial light.
Yeah.
Difficult to make, challenging to safeguard from things like the wind and rain, but fire was our first window."
And stinky.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
And it was our first window into the darkness of night. He says, fire and the artificial light and radiant warmth it produced changed everything and helped catapult humans towards the modern age. And I was like, all right, that's a pretty grandiose, but then again, it's right. You would still be sleeping when the sun goes down and waking up when the sun comes up if you didn't have some mechanism to create light.
I would still do that if I could get away with it.
I read that and I was like, I still want to do this now.
Yeah.
I just want to turn off all the lights.
Those are my natural hours.
It is always fascinating to me that like what was once desired, and then once it becomes ubiquitous, you then desire the opposite.
Yeah.
Henry VIII's time, you couldn't get food. If you were fat, you were royalty.
Oh, for sure.
Now you're like
the Botticelli woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And now it's like you just want to be thin. And I'm like, man, I would have fucking rocked it in Henry VIII's day. They would look at me and be like, that guy, he's a prince or a king or something. Look
He's
at him.
He's a supermodel.
Look at him waddling over here. Oh, that's sexy. I was just born 400 years too late.
Sure.
But the same is true now about light. Like when I take my boys camping, one of the best parts is being able to see the night sky devoid of light pollution.
Yeah.
I mean, Elon's doing a pretty good job of fucking that up with Starlink.
Sure.
But for the most part, I mean, I can go a couple hours outside of the city and I can see and show my kids the Milky Way with their naked eye.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible that you can still do that. Again, a couple thousand years ago, or according to you, a few thousand years ago, that was the norm, right? That was just the norm.
Right.
So
my favorite part of that is you're always, when you're looking up at the sky, at the stars, you're looking into the past.
You are looking into the past, yeah.
I love that.
Technically looking to your left or to your right's looking into the past. It's just a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Artificial light has historically been the expensive privilege of the wealthy and the powerful. Because, as you already alluded to, it was laborious and dirty to produce and maintain, and extremely limited in availability.
For sure.
You didn't have a quality source that was available to you. And really until industrialization, virtually the entire planet was poor. So light was a sought after unobtainium.
Yeah.
Like you didn't have a place to go for light, especially if you weren't one of the very few wealthy elites, a king or something along those lines. So Tony, I think, did a reasonable job of providing some perspective on how difficult it is to fathom the expense of light in the pre-industrial world. And he used this metric of, quote, lumen hours of artificial light.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's not, it's a good basis to compare light generation in different points of history. It's not perfect because human vision is logarithmic, right? So it's not linear, and you do this comparison, it makes it sort of linear. So it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Well, I can buy a lumen for X amount of dollars today, and I could have bought a lumen for X amount of dollars 5,000 years ago.
And he picked this normalization up from a text that I'm going to cite here in a second too. So he didn't just normalize it to cost; he normalized it to wage, which I thought was a really good way to do it.
That's even better.
It was even better. So, for example, in what we now call the UK, the price adjusted for inflation per million lumen hours of artificial light in the year 1302 CE, so what is that, roughly 700-ish years ago, was greater than $50,000 US, right?
Wow.
Now that is the cost to light output equivalent to running 10 13-watt LED light bulbs for 7 hours.
That's more than I pay now.
That's slightly more than you pay now. Not a lot. DWP's trying to get it there. They will. So for perspective, a home lit exclusively with candles today may appear as a mark of poverty, right? If your house only has candles, something's wrong.
Candles today would be so expensive, that would be a mark of wealth.
Well, that's true. But in or just be on fire. But in the 1300s, that was a sign of wealth.
Yeah.
Right? If you could afford candles, you were wealthy. Good candles then were made of beeswax, and they provided the best light available time, but the production required expensive materials, specialized skill set. There was a limited supply of natural beeswax, and you needed these artisans to make them.
Oh, sure.
Unless you were super wealthy, wealthy, you just could not get them. You couldn't even get candles. That wasn't an option. The extreme cost of light was really a technical problem. It wasn't like they were trying to keep it from folks. It was supply demand. You had a ton of demand for bright light, but no one had managed to develop a technology that would allow a practical way of producing it inexpensively and at scale. So then it starts to change, right? And you want to get from this before industrialization, artificial light was dim, it was dirty, you had soot coming off it, it was dangerous, it would literally light your house on fire. Or wasn't one of the early fires at Notre Dame was because of a torch or a candle?
I don't know. I'm not friends with the Dome.
Okay, Matt Ridley summarized the problem in his book, The Rational Optimist, how prosperity evolves. And he did some of this math that Tony cited. And he said in 1750 BCE, so that's nearly 3,800 years ago from today, he uses this metric that an hour of work at the average wage, you could buy 24 lumen hours of light. And that would be provided by a sesame oil lamp.
For 1 hour of work, I can buy 24 lumen hours of light.
24 lumen hours of light.
I can't read by 1 lumen.
You definitely cannot read by 1 lumen.
How many lumens does it take for me to be able to read?
So generally speaking, for reading, you need about 450 lumens.
Okay, so I need a lot of work hours. So I need to spend a lot of my work day to pay for or to be able to read.
So for 1 hour in 1750 BCE, you're going to get a couple minutes of reading time.
Yeah.
That's it. Not much. That, by the way, you probably can't even afford the book, but let's just start with...
In 1740 BC, I probably didn't know how to read, right?
You also can't read. So by 1800, that's about 3,500 years later, it had increased nearly eightfold to 186 lumen hours via a tallow candle. So it's a candle basically made out of animal fat.
Wow.
Right?
That was a long time for that to increase that much.
So 3,500 years, you're only seeing a light to wage output increase of about 8x.
Yeah.
Now, 8 years later, in 1880, you see a 24x increase to 4,400 lumen hours.
Now we're talking.
So you see this explosion starts to happen.
What was invented then that made the difference?
Kerosene, like a kerosene lamp.
Okay.
So from 1750 BCE to 1880, which is just over 3,600 years, you see a nearly 200x increase in the amount of light that you could buy with 1 hour of earnings at the average wage.
Now we're cooking.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
200x. It's a long period of time, but you see this sort of the hockey stick in the graph. But then it gets really wonky.
Okay.
So in the next 70 years after 1880, you see another jump of 120x to 500,000 lumen hours. And it's sort of this plateau with the incandescent light bulb in 1950.
1 hour of work buys now 500,000 lumen hours.
Yes, 1 hour at your average wage. At your average wage is buying 500,000 lumen hours. And then in the next 60 years after that, there's another 16x increase to about 8.5 million lumen hours via the compact fluorescent light bulb.
Okay.
In the 130 years since the kerosene lamp, we've now seen 1900x increase in the purchasable light output with 1 average wage hour.
That's a good return.
Which is bananas. So 3,600 years gets all of humanity a 200x increase. And then the next 130 years gets you a 1900x increase. So you're getting 10 times the amount of light increase in less than 4% of the time.
It's like compounding money. All the fun happens at the end.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I would call an advanced technology, right? I mean, that's outpacing Moore's law significantly. Yeah. So you look at Moore's law and you're like, or Parker's law, or whatever the hell we're calling it. And you go, oh, this is way better. This is way more significant. So, okay, to put it in another way, an hour of work today earns you about 300 days worth of reading light. And an hour of work in 1800 earned you about 10 minutes of reading light.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But I have to work a lot harder today.
Yeah, definitely harder today. Back then, people were just doing like Sudokus.
Yeah, no, you could kick back a lot more.
And crosswords. Yeah, it was a lot easier then. Definitely the work then was pretty simple. Bill Bryson, who's the author of At Home, A Short History of Private Life.
I love Bill Bryson.
Yeah, he had a great quote. Open your refrigerator door and you summon forth more light than the total amount enjoyed by most households in the 18th century.
Oh, yeah.
That is bananas. When I read this quote, I immediately thought of the scene in Ghostbusters where she opens the fridge door and you've got Gozer in the back. Like because that's what it is. You have the entire 18th century compressed into your refrigerator from a light perspective when you open it. So think about that the next time you go in for some deep fried pickles or whatever the hell it is you keep in your fridge. But here's what's interesting too. So you think about how we got here, and much like with other technologies, and this is specifically, I'm trying to be analogous to things like the internet, AI, arguably even social media. The way you get there,
never.
Not just you're breaking eggs to make omelets, like you're doing a lot of things that people don't like
to
get to the thing. So I'm not going all the way back to sesame oil. But if you go back a little ways,
Sesame oil?
well, yeah, it was one of the first things we used to make light out of in a reasonable manner.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. Let's go back to like the 1800s.
Yes.
Ish. Do you know one of the first sort of scalable, reliable sources of light was in the 1800s?
Oil.
Ish.
You just said it.
What kind of oil?
Well, it wasn't sesame seed because that would take forever to get any amount
Little
of it.
tiny fingers, just squeezing them out. Just squeezing them out. Little tiny bits of oil. No, but you're right. I joke about
People who live in Texas. Maybe they drilled down and they found oil.
it. No. Think of the opposite of a little tiny itty bitty sesame seed. You want something big and you want it to have a lot of oil.
Okay.
Or shit you could turn into oil. That's right. Whales. Whale oil.
Oh,
Yeah.
oil fat. Sure.
So that was one of the first scalable, bright, reliable, adjustable, and portable sort of on-demand artificial light.
Also stinky. Still stinky.
Well, yeah, exactly. Whale oil burned with a clean and steady light. It could be moved from room to room, so you could illuminate like a book if you were reading a book, if you could afford one. So whale oil was this thing of like, oh, we can make this. And despite this initial abundance of whales, whale oil was still expensive to harvest and refine and transport. And while whale oil provided the best illumination during the early Industrial Revolution, it was still astonishingly expensive.
Yeah.
In 1850, 4 liters of whale oil cost as much as half the weekly wage of an average worker.
Okay.
So it wasn't cheap.
Good, because you would prefer not to kill whales.
Well, wait to see what saves the whales. While much of the industrializing world was gripped with a sudden fevered rush for oils, lubricants, other products derived from whales, North America was swiftly becoming a titan of whaling, an industry that helped to catapult American ports towards prosperity.
Okay.
The use of whale oil and the start of the industrialized manufacturing of paraffin candles and lamps helped to push down the cost of artificial light in Britain and around the world. So it started to become more accessible. Lighting with whale oil was obviously not without consequences. The entire process was a savagely cruel, filthy, and laborious undertaking.
Awful.
But this was designed to sate the civilization's thirst for illumination. And the whaling industry pushed a number of whale species to the brink of extinction.
Sure.
So by 1846, so the middle of the 19th century, North America alone had deployed a fleet of more than 700 whaling ships. The total number of whales killed in pursuit of oil for illumination and other whale-based commodities, it's not well known, but at least 300,000 whales were slaughtered between the 17 and 1800s alone.
Wow.
So that was a lot. At the time, whale oil wasn't the only lighting fuel available.
Okay.
You also had gas lighting, which was a term we use a lot today, but this was actual lighting of gas. And it was available in parts of Europe and parts of America in the early 1800s, but it was expensive.
Backtrack 1 second here. Gas as in like natural gas, or gas as in a derivative of petroleum?
Not a derivative of petroleum either. This early source of gas was stuff that was they call it either wood gas or coal gas, and in limited cases, this stuff called water gas. It was stuff that, the lamp-lighters used. It had high energy density because it is a hydrocarbon fuel, but...
So it's some sort of oil derivative.
It is, but it was, I don't know the exact time. It was distilled from anything that you could get. It was distilled from wood.
Sure.
Or leftover olives or peat. It was whatever you had, but it wasn't, to my knowledge, it was not pumped. It wasn't because you sort of have this explosion in hydrocarbons, pardon the pun.
Yeah, sure.
That comes later.
I would think burning that would have consequences.
It is terrible. That was part of why it never really caught on. This stuff was very sooty. So this gaslighting was expensive to install and maintain. It was relatively dangerous. It produced toxic vapors that would kill plants and nauseate people.
Sure.
And destroy fabrics. So it was really only the wealthy who could afford to have it and then use it, but they also disdained it because it destroyed their stuff.
As soon as you had the pipes put in and you turn the lights on, you immediately want the thing gone.
Exactly. So the niche for gas was largely commercial and industrial use. So gaslighting became a staple source for factories, large facilities, and streets. The streets of New York were lit.
Oh, is that where we get the expression gaslighting?
No. The origin of the term is the 1938 British thriller play Gaslight by Patrick Hamilton, which provided the source material for the 1940 British film Gaslight. Set among London's elite during the Victorian era, it portrays a seemingly genteel husband using lies and manipulation to isolate his harassed wife and persuade her that she is mentally unwell so that he can steal from her.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the play. I just thought, where does he get the term when he comes up with the play?
One of the husband's tricks is to secretly dim and brighten the indoor gas-powered lighting while he insists his wife is imagining it.
Oh, okay.
My hunch is that's where the title of the play comes from.
Got it. Now I'm with you.
Related, but just the use of it, not necessarily a feature of it.
I gotcha.
It was bright. It was at least 20 times brighter than anything that had come before it.
Sure, but you can't breathe around it.
Yeah, So, look, everything in life is a balance.
A little toxic.
The use of gas for lighting was the first opportunity that we had as humans to experience anything like the modern full room ambient light.
Yeah.
And by the middle of the 19th century, gas lighting was available in many of the major cities in America and Britain, presuming you could afford it. So you had access if you had money, it was there. But if you were poor in the early 19th century, you usually had three choices. You could either burn tallow candles that were made from rendered animal fat.
Sure.
You could huddle next to an open fire, or you could sit in the dark. Those were basically your three options. Not a lot.
That last option sounds really good because you could close your eyes and just go to sleep.
I know. It's just so funny how we all get there. I'm just like, 6 p.m. Yep, bedtime. So then as the Industrial Revolution begins to gather pace, so did the demand for more illumination. The pressure on this whale population was still intense. But there was another option. This sort of came to be in 1846 when Abraham Genzer, this Canadian physician with an infatuation for coal geology, devised a method for extracting through distillation a combustible liquid from coal tar, known as kerosene.
Yeah.
It was a byproduct of the gas production of the time. So it was this, you had this crap already there and you could extract kerosene. Kerosene was a genuine breakthrough in lighting technology because it burnt brilliantly. It could be produced cheaper than any illuminant that came before it. No, you don't have to go kill a bunch of whales to do this.
Sure.
And it was squeezed from coal, so it helped drive the cost of light down dramatically.
A lot easier to go on a mission to get coal
than a whale mission.
Than it is to go on a whale mission.
Yeah, the coal swims a little bit slower.
There's expense to that.
And then when paired with new lamp technology at the time, it provided a bright, odor-free, non-perishable and inexpensive flame.
Much better.
Which were all features that were not found in whale oil.
By the way, another byproduct of coal tar is saccharin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
To sweeten your coffee.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
Absolutely disgusting.
Oh, I'd love me some coal tar in my drink. Okay, so by 1850, the total output for coal-derived kerosene was slightly less than 18,000 barrels per month for the entirety of North America.
That seems like a lot, though.
I mean, it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. I mean, the point is you just didn't have a lot.
Okay.
Demand outstrips...
Not a lot by comparison to today, but for the times, that seems like a lot.
Sure. Well, demand outstripped supply by a wide margin, and there was no easy method to increase production from coal tar. So what was needed was a method of producing kerosene inexpensively and on an industrial scale capable of meeting the lighting demands of a rapidly modernizing and sort of more prosperous global civilization. So what comes next? This is where it gets really fascinating to me. The next great lighting revolution comes in August of 1859 when Edwin Drake and a small team struck oil in the rural woods of Pennsylvania. And this was at a super shallow depth of 70 feet.
Shooting at some food and up from the ground came a bubbling crude.
Yep.
Whatever the song is.
Exactly, right? While the Drake well itself was not a commercial success, it was an unparalleled proof of concept. Because now you had oil in America, right? As you said, black gold, Texas tea. And drilling was the way that you liberated from the ground. Now access to an abundant, inexpensive crude oil would become the chemical energy breakthrough for the first mass lighting revolution in the history of civilization. Yeah. To back up for a second, this was in 1859. This was not that long ago, but this is why you start to see this massive increase in the ability to light stuff.
Oh, California had a gold rush in 1849, and they sat around in the dark for the next 10 years.
So the industrial scale production of liquid hydrocarbons was about to drive whaling for illumination out of business, while transforming the entire course of human civilization. So it's fascinating to me to think that crude oil should likely be credited with saving the whales, at least in the 1800s.
Yeah.
You save the whales with oil, which I would have never connected those two. But think about how many less whale species we would have if you didn't have oil, because we would have just kept harvesting whales and killing whales for their oil till they were all gone.
And we may drive that down to zero with greenhouse gases when we heat the whole thing up and it all dies. So oil may also be the death of us.
Well, that's the fascinating part to me, right? Is it's like, well, hey, this is way better for us. And you're like, oh, wait, no, maybe
Ultimately,
not.
maybe not.
Things used in moderation. So kerosene refined from crude oil created a substantial free fall in the cost of illumination. So 30 years after the first purpose-drilled crude oil well was completed, the cost of lighting in Britain had plummeted to less than about 300 pounds per million lumen hours. That is a decrease of 97.5% from 100 years earlier. That is insane. And you saw the same thing in America, the same sort of price drop. It's tempting to dismiss the production and use of kerosene as a chemical footnote in the story of human progress, but countless late nights were spent, drafting bridges or ships or experiments, writing books, building buildings, all by kerosene light. It was an important step in that 19th century period where you didn't have another option.
There are a whole group of people, and I am not one of them, who are night owls, who thrive at night, who can now be productive because they now have lights past darkness.
I used to be that person.
I'm so not that person.
Oh, nighttime was always my favorite, best time. And then my kids just fuck that all up. It's just, it's not, It's not that I don't enjoy sleeping. I enjoy sleeping. I just like being productive, and I always found nighttime to be the time for me. Now, I get to stay up up late and get up early because children.
That'll change.
And then be tired all day. It's great.
Yeah.
So the first lighting revolution, fueled by this kerosene, it illuminated factories, workshops, businesses, and in doing so, dramatically transformed the productivity of our species, of humans, at night.
Isn't that always the case? Like air conditioning when it first came was for factories and businesses and printing houses.
Harder to scale down cost effectively.
Yeah.
Presumably, yeah. Now you're talking about the mid 19th century, give or take, maybe a little bit later than that. Now millions of middle class and poor families had their first real opportunity to enjoy relatively clean, safe, bright light.
Yeah.
You did not have this option before, and this is bananas to me. This is less than 200 years ago. You as like middle class or below didn't have access to light.
Crazy.
And then I go, well, wait, what happens in the next 200 years? Like we're standing on the precipice of AI, and I go, in the next 200 years, what the hell are you going to have?
Oh, sure.
It's going to be, but then I just stopped thinking about it because my brain starts to scramble.
Well, even from oil, it got better fast.
Yeah. But this first sort of breakthrough in lighting technology was nothing in comparison to the revolution from this coal-driven electrification. Like this brings us back to electricity, right? The light was the thing that came before electricity.
Yeah.
And that dawn of electric illumination really began in earnest with Edison, right? Once Thomas Edison began marketing and installing the first commercially available light bulbs in the 1880s, it went bananas.
Because then people wanted wires run to their house.
Yep.
They wanted access to generators and actual stable current.
So now you have all of this demand, right? And then you've got innovation. So you're still inventing a whole bunch of stuff at the time to allow this stuff to work, which I think we all take for granted now. And that pushed the availability, quality, safety, and just the ubiquity of artificial light upward. And while pushing its cost down to basically universal accessibility for all of humanity. I mean, I think you look at electricity and go, you can't live without having this.
Right.
So incandescent lighting would eventually give way to fluorescent lighting and then ultimately the LEDs that we have today. So we've just continued to drive efficiency. And now the cost of artificial light in the UK, Tony uses data points from the UK because I think you just have more historically reliable records. So you can have the comparison. It's decreased so rapidly over just the past century that between 1900 and 2000, the million lumen hour price of artificial light in the UK has fell in inflation adjusted terms 100-fold.
Wow.
So you've gone from around 236 pounds
in 100 years.
In 100 years. All of these other things that come after it, no matter how non-adjacent it seems, was likely influenced by light because now you could work at night. Like just that simple thing of like how much stuff was done under the umbrella of artificial light. And the answer is all of it.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing that was done only during the day. Like everything was done at day and at night. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I started on this quest of saying electricity, man, that's got to be early. Like what could have come earlier than that propelled us forward in technology? And you're like, oh, wait. But then you think about guys pre this, the Newtons and the Galileos of the world, and they did not have accessible lighting.
Yeah.
Right? What would Newton have come up with had he had another 6 hours a day?
But he might have been a day guy, and so he made full use of the regular daylight hours.
Or maybe you would have had Bluetooth in the 1600s. I don't know.
Okay.
Who might have
You're right. You win.
I'm not. I'm just saying. I don't know. I'm not. Maybe he wasn't a Bluetooth guy. Maybe he was a wired guy. I don't know.
He could have been. I think he probably would have been a wired guy.
Wouldn't that have even been a better sort of rivalry? Like forget Tesla and Edison. Like you would have like Newton is like pro Bluetooth, and then you have some other some philosopher at the time who's like pro wire, and he and Descartes are getting into some flame war.
Someone else is very upset because they want it to be mesh networks.
And then there's Jeff automating his castle, just constantly talking about castle automation. It's like, oh fuck, here comes Parker. He's gonna talk about the drawbridge again.
Drawbridge goes up, the drawbridge goes down on schedule.
Look at this. The knight shows up, and as soon as the knight gets there, it reads his sword, and the bridge goes, oh, fucking Parker, shut up. So that's light. I thought that was super interesting.
That is really interesting. Light is kind of amazing.
I'm also very picky with my light. Do you have a color temperature that you keep your house at?
I do. I'm good for warm light.
Yes,
that's mostly what I like. I do not like the cold light. There are now bulbs that will make the transformation from being warm light in dawn to being cold light by noon.
During the day.
And then they get warmer as the evening. And I haven't tried that, but I am going to try it.
I'm curious about those. I've bought a lot of the set once and forget it lights where you can set the temperature in, right? An LED, you set the temperature as you want. I'm like a 3,000 and less guy. Like most stuff here is 2,700.
Everything I buy is 2,700.
Like nice and warm. It doesn't hurt my eyes. And then I walk into some people's houses where they're like 6,000 K, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
what are you doing? Like it hurts my eyes when I walk in. Yeah. It's just so like bright and it's harsh is the word I would use. My father, the house that they're in, They had all old halogen, screw in like floodlights, like, 90 watts each.
Yeah, sure.
They took it upon themselves to replace them in the dining room. And I came back and looked, and they're all like 6,000 K. And I'm like, when you're eating, it's the hardest possible time. It's like, oh, fuck, no, we're going to swap all those out.
By the way, taking out the halogen bulbs, you probably lowered the ambient temperature in the
without a doubt.
neighborhood by 100 degrees.
Without a doubt. Those things are little tiny heaters.
It's just nothing hotter.
Yeah, those, my entire house, the first thing I did, I don't think we were here 2 weeks, and I replaced every single remaining halogen here with LEDs.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Even my original LEDs that I got years and years ago when I was first experimenting with LED, they all had fins to get rid of the heat. They all had heat sinks to get rid of the heat. Now they don't seem to have any of that. None of that seems to be necessary.
I still have 3 that have that came with the house, and they put out really clean light, and I've kept them. I know they're not efficient. They're not on very often, but those are the only ones I've left. They're not halogen. There are 0 halogens left in the house because they're so terrible. And now with LEDs, you don't need cans anymore. Do you know this?
No.
You don't even need cans.
It's just flat.
It's just flat. It's a pancake. Right. You don't even need a cavity above the space. If you can get a wire to it. And I'm like, whoa, now ceiling lights are trivial.
Oh, yeah. And have as many as you want. Have many where you want.
Totally.
It's amazing.
This has been lights.
That's how cheap light has become.
I know.
That we can actually be light snobs about types of light we want in our houses.
Isn't that nuts?
All right, we have to get out of here, but quickly before we do, have you seen or read anything good this last week?
Well, yeah, of course. I so desperately want to stay watching the Dodgers in the World Series.
What fun's that been?
But I'm going to resist this. What fun has it been? I've been yelling, walking around my house constantly every time a game comes on. We'll set that aside.
I find the whole thing to be really stressful.
Yeah, it's a little, for a guy who likes to openly admit that baseball is boring as shit and puts me to sleep. I have definitely not had that experience in the past couple games in the World Series. It's been super exciting.
I love walking out of the park as people are saying, after a victory, and they say, wow, that was so fun. And I'm like, I don't remember the part that was fun. I just remember the whole thing being really stressful.
You just remember some man you've never met before yelling, clear! That's the only part you remember as you go into defib.
I turned toward the end of game 2 when we're losing, and I turned to a man next to me and I say, I don't know this man. I say, remind me again, why do we like baseball?
Yeah, totally. Why do we come here? Why? What's the point?
Tickets are $25,000 each.
Exactly.
Why do we do this to ourselves?
Yeah. Why are we beating ourselves up? I mean, it really is my answer, but I'm going to resist. So I've fallen into another deep, dark rabbit hole this past week that is really fascinating, and we should probably do an episode on it. But it's called speed runs. Do you know what speed runs are?
I know the old-timey speed runs where you played video games really, really fast.
Yeah.
Is that a similar thing?
Yes, I'm familiar with speed runs and that concept, but this was
I think we used to say it's singular, speed run.
Yeah, speed run. Well, yeah, but if you have more than one, then they're speed runs. They're plural.
Okay.
Right? More than one speed run. Here's how I got here. I have these silly silicone ice cube trays from years ago, and I ran across them in an old box of kitchen stuff. I put them on the counter to deal with. My kids asked about them. My wife described it to them as, oh, these are Super Mario Brothers characters.
Oh, okay.
I was like, no, those are Space Invaders. Like, let's get it right. Like, let's not teach children.
Wow, they're really old.
Well, they're little, molds of Space Invaders.
Yeah, no, I know the character.
So my kids have no idea what Space Invaders are. So of course I go to YouTube, I pull up Space Invaders videos.
Because your kids aren't 40.
Exactly. And they watch Space Invaders. And by the way, they thought it was really cool, which I was like, why are you enjoying this? So we're watching Space Invaders. But then shortly thereafter, with the help of the great algorithm in the sky, it was suggested to me a video called The History of Super Mario Brothers 3 100% World Records. And I'm like, what's the 100% part mean?
Yeah.
That's unique to me. It's a specific type of speed run for any game, but in this case for Super Mario Brothers 3. And it is for running every single level in the game. No warps. You can't skip anything.
Oh.
You can't use any.
Can't take advantage of glitches, because that's what speedrunning was all about when I was young.
No, you can take advantage of glitches. This is what's interesting, right? This is some of the nuance. Now, Super Mario Brothers 3 holds a very special place in my heart, because I remember the day that game came out.
Sure.
My mother somehow obtained 3 copies of it. Nobody could get it. She got 1 for me and 2 for my friends. And it was just a fantastic game. So watching these people compete and have strategies, legitimate strategies, where you're running a marathon and not a sprint. You are doing things and you go, well, that can't be the fastest way.
Yeah.
But they're trying to either maybe get a glitch or do something that allows them to get through the whole level the fastest. So
yeah, sure.
Anyway, so this video comes up by Summoning Salt. He does an amazing job walking through the different approaches taken over the years to lower the time of the 100% world record holder. And it's super interesting. So I'll put a link in the notes, but it's a really
How fun is that?
It's really fun. He does a great job narrating it and showing how the time has decreased over time and what people have done and the approaches they've taken to change it. It's a lot of fun. So definitely, if you're a fan of games or if you're over 40 years old, I think think you'll enjoy it.
That's very cool.
How about you?
There is simply nothing more valuable to America than her immigrants, and my recommendation is a perfect illustration of that. The 2020 documentary, The Donut King.
Yeah.
Ted Noy fled the Khmer Rouge with his wife and 3 children to Camp Pendleton in San Diego. He worked as a church janitor and at a gas station when one day he smelled something amazing. Fresh donuts being made by Winchells.
Oh, yeah.
He asked about starting a donut shop and learned that Winchells would train him for free. Soon he bought his own donut shop, Christie's, and then another, and then another. And when Cambodian refugees came to California, he started donut shops with them.
That's awesome.
He actually would sponsor them. The State Department would call him.
That's awesome.
And say, do you know so-and-so? And he would lie and say, oh yeah, that's my cousin, so they could get in.
Sure.
And then he would start them in the donut business.
That's amazing.
And eventually he had 70 donut shops.
Wow.
Dunkin' Donuts found it so hard to break into the LA market because of this guy that in the late 90s, they gave up.
That's super interesting to me because whenever I go outside of LA,
It's Dunkin' Donuts everywhere.
there's Dunkin' Donuts everywhere. You can't get a non-Dunkin' donut. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But here you just have a random smattering of emporiums of random people's donuts, and I think that's amazing.
Most of them are Christie's, which he called
bet,
his original
yeah.
stores, and then Donut King, because people call him the Donut King. And then you'll see some that are just DK,
DK. Okay, cool.
which stands for Donut King.
Yeah, of course.
To this day, when I go into a donut shop in the Los Angeles area, there's a high probability it is owned and run by Cambodians.
It's amazing.
Who got their start from Ted.
That's amazing.
An amazing story of a fascinating immigrant, the Donut King. See it on Hulu now.
And now I'm hungry.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to check that out.
That is the episode.
Thank you for joining us for all this nonsense. A truly terrible podcast from The Awful Company. Visit us on the web at nonsense.productions. I'm CJ.
I'm Jeff Parker.
If you like this program, please follow, download, subscribe, and like it at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, AntennaPod, iHeartRadio, Spotify, my favorite Overcast, wherever you may get your podcasts from.
Nonsense uses Signal Messenger. There's no such thing as secure messaging on software that is not open sourced. Signal, strongly encrypted open source messaging. Check it out. Special thanks to our floor director, Jeff Fear.
Thanks, Boinger. We'll be here every Thursday morning for more nonsense. Please join us. Let's go, Dodgers.
I love a parade.